Okay, thank you, Pete. It's so lovely to be here today talking at the Bath Digital Festival. I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to speak about the future of work and putting the human back into human resources. So just to let you know the format of the session today. Thank you, Jane. So Jane and I'm speaking here today with Jane Geneva. Jane and I have known each other for actually quite a few years now. So it's a real pleasure to be presenting this session together. So we are in conversation about the future of work. So we've got 6 questions actually that we're going to be asking of one another that we thought were particularly pertinent to this topic. That's just to get the conversation started though, because there will be time for questions at the end. If you do have questions along the way, please do put them into the Q&A box, the questions box rather than the chat box. We will only be monitoring the Q&A box, so please do enter your questions into there, and hopefully we'll get a chance to answer as many of them as possible at the end. We've also got a couple of surveys and a couple of polls that we're going to be doing along the way that will hopefully inform this topic even further, so it should be a really interesting discussion. So just by way of introduction, my name's Polly Rathbone Ward. I've worked in HR for 19 years now in a variety of industries in the private and public sector, and most recently in engineering and publishing. And then nearly 3 years ago, I set up my own HR consultancy business, Rathbone HR Solutions. Primarily, I work with small to medium-sized businesses, helping them with strategic and operational HR. The thing I really love, that is the basis of what I do really, is to help employers improve the employee experience, the employee journey and workplace culture. Because if at the end of the day, if you've got happy and healthy employees, there are going to be lots of other business benefits as well. So that's the basis of what I do. So I'll just hand over to Jane to introduce herself, and then we'll get going on the questions. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks very much, Polly. And I'd say likewise, it's really nice to be doing this event with you, having known you since you were CIPD chair, I think, for Bath and West Wiltshire all those years ago, when I was working in-house. So I came to become an HR specialist through a bit of a roundabout way, having worked in a number of sectors, including the armed forces, and in a number of functions, including facilities and finance. And I came to HR and kind of organisational development to help organisations to make the most of the employees that they've got. Really, it feels like there's a lot of waste of human potential in organisations, and having done an MBA, it seemed like it was the people specialism that really could help organisations to realise that potential. So I moved into HR as a specialist 10, 12 years ago now. Having done 3 lead roles in-house in small and medium-sized organisations between 70 and 700 employees. I left to set up Shift as a consultancy, and through Shift I work specifically with leaders to help them to change and transform their organisations into something, a kind of context that helps people to achieve their potential and teams to achieve their potential. Because after all, organisations are the way that we as human beings come together to do stuff, and we're so much more than we bring so much more value than we do as individuals when we can work together as a team and as a whole. So I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Great, thank you, Jane. Right, so as I said, we've got 6 questions that we were going to ask of each other, and then the conversation will flow from there, because we've got lots to say on these topics. So we've got lots to cover, so I think we'll kick off. So did you want to go first, Jane?
Yeah, I'll ask the first question then. And just a reminder to everybody, if you do have any questions that you want to ask us, pop them in the Q&A. Well, I'll try and keep up with them, and kind of we'll discuss them as we go along, or you can keep them to the end, whichever you prefer. But the first thing we wanted to talk about, and what I'd really like to hear from Polly, is what are the best things that you've seen happening in businesses during this last, what are we now, 7-8 months since 7 months since March, the lockdown and all of the stuff that's been happening afterwards. What are the best things you've been seeing happening out there?
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so it has been a real roller coaster for businesses this year. I think in my role, I see a complete overview of all the different industries. And I do have to comment that I think people and businesses have had a real mixed time during this time. Some businesses have kept going as normal. Some businesses massively changed as they had to overnight move to remote working. Some businesses had to close almost completely and furlough huge numbers of people. So I think we're at a time now where it's like one size is not appropriate. It does not fit all now in the workplace. It's now time to think of people as individuals and businesses as well, and think what we can do best for our people. So I think I've seen huge leaps forward in terms of flexible working, actually. And I think in terms of flexible working, I mean any variety really to your sort of place of work or hours of work. So that's what I mean by flexible working. And I think people have taken individual circumstances more into account than ever before. They've almost had to, really. So this has kind of forced many businesses to change hugely in the way that they do things. And I think now presents an amazing opportunity almost to look back at that, reflect on what worked, what happened, and possibly make, more significant and more permanent change possibly going forwards. So many people have effectively been working flexibly since March. It's a long time now. So, and some people again will have been enjoying that time. They'll actually, will have really enjoyed working from home. They don't have to commute anymore, and those sorts of things. So they've enjoyed that aspect of it. Some people enjoyed it for a bit, and then the novelty sort of wore off a bit, and then you've got the four walls that you're looking at all the time. Some people found it incredibly difficult with childcare and homeschooling, of course, when we were in the depths of lockdown. So I would encourage organisations, to look back and see what worked during this time when we were forced into this situation, and actually what we can do now to shape working practices in the future, perhaps, and looking after people as well. So I have seen a bit of an increase in an interest in co-working spaces, and even the third working space, they call it. So where else can you go to just give yourself a bit of a change of scene, a bit of a break? The latest government guidance is that we work from home where possible. Of course, that's not possible for all industries, but how can we use that to our best advantage, really? There was an article on the BBC News, I think about a week ago, that some pubs were renting out tables for people to go and work at for a small fee, and they get unlimited tea and coffee all day, which I thought was quite interesting. I think somebody on my Twitter feed had a pint. I don't know whether that was like as part of the deal or what it was, but yeah, definitely had a pint of beer. I suppose when it comes to the end of the day, perhaps, yeah, definitely. Why not? So also health and safety and well-being, I think, has really come to the fore. Organisations really considering what they can do to look after their people, but I think we'll probably get onto that a bit more in future, in further questions. How about you, Jane? What have you seen? So being ex-military, the directive style, despite the fact that I advocate for autonomy, but I like to see the directive style when it's working right and at the right time. And I was really surprised and quite impressed by the response to the lockdown in the first instance. There were companies who were anticipating it. There were companies who shut down early. People moved to home very quickly. People were prepared to use their own devices. The communication seemed really good between employer and employee. It seemed to go pretty smoothly,
compared to how we would have anticipated it to go, maybe 6 months before that. So I was really surprised by the fact that people were given clear direction by both their employer and the government. There was lots of support for them, and people got up and got running at home really quickly. It was amazing, and I was particularly pleased by that, because obviously through my work I talk a lot to employers about kind of letting go of some of that control. And I think there's a real fear amongst employers about, well, what happens if we do this and it all goes wrong, or what happens if people just disappear and never come back to work, or what happens if people don't do anything when they're working at home? Aren't they just going to kind of sit in front of daytime TV? And I think that there's a lot of people who were fearful around that, a lot of managers who were fearful about that, and colleagues, I would imagine, that have actually been proved wrong. So that actually people are motivated by doing a good job. They're fulfilled by feeling like they've achieved something during the day, and that's as important to them as it is to their line manager or whatever. So that was the best surprise for me that there could be, really. So it's been real eye-opener, because the whole thing about management practices being self-fulfilling prophecies. If you continue to manage people in quite a controlling way, then actually they will just, because you don't trust them, or you manage them like you don't trust them, then they will prove themselves not to be trustworthy. They'll game the system. They'll kind of cut corners. And when we want people to be fully engaged in their work and in our businesses, then we need them to be working as though, we need to manage them as though we trust them, even if there might be that little niggling doubt, or you think that person sat in the corner over there might not be particularly trustworthy. But if you manage everybody like you trust them, then you get very different results. And I think that's really been played out through the lockdown itself. So
I was actually speaking to a head of HR for a company just the other day, who was telling me about her experiences during this time. And she said that working more flexibly and allowing people to be more flexible with their work had been on their agenda for 6 years. And coronavirus forced it to happen overnight. And as you say, people are just as productive. They're happier because they have a bit more control over what they're doing. They don't have to sit on a commute for an hour or two every day. They have more control about what they do. Having said that, I think there are definitely areas that can be improved. And I have heard that people are concerned about, moving away from their desks sometimes during the day, because they feel that they should be on call all the time, and boundaries have become slightly blurred. But I absolutely agree with you, definitely.
And I know we're going to go on and talk about a little bit more about trust, aren't we?
Indeed. So the next question was, what have been the most surprising things you've heard? Have we covered that?
I'm always surprised, aren't I? So I think I did mention surprise in my answer to the first question, but I have been surprised by some of the big companies who have just gone, like, everybody can stay at home. Quite early on, it seemed that people, Twitter, I think, had said, we're not expecting anybody back until the middle of 2021, and that seemed like such a long time away at that point. And we were still, I think, hopeful that everything was going to get cleared up and sorted out and it'd all be back to normal way before then. So the fact that these big companies were looking so far forward and saying it's fine, stay at home, was a surprise to me. Equally surprising and a little bit disappointing as those companies that have been trying to drag people back and force people back into the workplace when really they could still work from home. So I'm sorry, I was just going to go on to talk about something else now, but I know we're also touching on that with another question, so I'll try not to overlap too much. But what about from your perspective then? What have been the most surprising things you've seen?
Well, we had a U-turn from the government, didn't we, at the end of September? They previously said everyone should get back to the workplace if they can. And then at the end of September, we had, a couple of weeks later, we had, no, everyone should be back at home working if possible. So, and I think similar to you, I was surprised that actually it seemed to me that most employers hadn't made that change to go back to the workplace and had just continued working remotely. So when that U-turn happened, they were mainly at home anyway.
There was a real resistance, wasn't there? Sorry, to cutting into.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, yeah.
There's that real resistance to going, actually, no, we don't think that's right. They didn't take the easy option and just go back to the default, which was nice. And I know there's loads of savings to be made in terms of, floor space and things like that in places like the City of London, because it costs a fortune to have some of those huge offices and things. So you can kind of see why people would want to take the opportunity. But it's a huge development, it feels. In the way we work.
Absolutely. Okay, great, thank you.
So what are the sort of themes that you've seen emerging?
Well, I think employers are now considering longer term what may be happening, as well as employees, I think, thinking, I might be quite happy at home. Actually, how can I make this more permanent? Or I'm desperate to get back into the workplace. I think, again, it's back to individual circumstances and understanding what people really need and want for their mental health. So this sort of, in the longer term, keep it from an employer's perspective, keeping employees motivated and engaged while leading a team remotely. And from an employee's point of view, I wonder if there's going to be a bit of a deluge of sort of flexible working requests perhaps coming in the future, because they may think, actually, I'm productive. If I spend 2 days in the office perhaps in the future and 3 days at home, this would make my work-life balance so much more pleasant. I'd be so much more happy. I could spend more time with the children. I don't have to commute. So I wonder how that's going to marry in the future. And so I think we're probably going to see a bit of an emergence of a sort of hybrid working. And I've been talking to employers about sort of taking a preemptive strike almost, and thinking longer term and thinking, right, who is likely to want to do that? Who's likely to be interested in hybrid working, or actually who's really wanting to get back to the office because of their personal circumstances? I think as well a feeling of sort of belonging and inclusion. I think through COVID and lockdown we had a bit of a sense of community that grew, I think, through, neighbours helping one another. There's a real sense of helping local businesses and supporting local businesses. And I think perhaps that's filtering through, perhaps into the workplace. It's almost like people's expectations are changing a little bit. And I think the narrative at work has to change as well. So how can we sort of be more compassionate and create that sense of community, even though we're working perhaps remotely? I also think mental health and well-being is an absolutely massive and very important topic right now, when uncertainty is continuing and we're not quite sure what the future holds. So as employers, I think it's really important to sort of create what we can, like sort of safety around that, psychological safety, and creating a sense of community, and actually what we're working for, what's the purpose behind our organisation, what are we doing, how are we achieving collective goals, and helping people to see how they contribute towards that, I think, and create that sort of community.
Yeah, I think that whole piece on purpose is important, isn't it? That, we could just at home just kind of doing what we normally do and getting on with tasks and things, but it feels like we need more of a sense of meaning and purpose to what we're doing, even more so than we did when we were in the office, potentially. And obviously, we're talking a lot about people in the office, aren't we? And we know everybody doesn't work in an office, and everybody can't work from home. So, but I think, it's perhaps also accelerating that pace of change and a greater interest in the purpose of the company above and beyond profit. So which has been really interesting. I totally agree on the well-being and mental health side. And I wonder if part of that is that we're actually, we have literally got a window into people's homes, haven't we, through, Zoom and various other video conferencing software, that you can see people sat in their own home, sat on the sofa, sat on the bed, or however people were working in the first instance before IKEA reopened and everybody managed to get a desk. But it felt like you were more conscious of the difficulties that people were finding, and I know it's particularly true, isn't it, of women with children who have taken on a lot of the childcare since they've been working from home, over and above their fair share, I would say. And the CMI, I know, has been particularly concerned about that. I did see some stats saying something like when the government was trying to push everybody to go back to work in August, September time, they were saying that 2 in 5 mothers, and why they picked on mothers and not parents, I'm not sure, but 2 in 5 mothers at that point did not have childcare which would allow them to go back and work properly. So I've seen a lot of women really struggling to fit work in around their childcare requirements and having to do that, particularly when the schools were closed. It's been a huge challenge, and fair play to all of those mothers out there that have been able to make a success and to continue to deliver for their organisations, their employers, regardless of the challenges that they were facing from home. It's been admirable, I think, what they've actually been able to do. So that I also saw, from an inclusion perspective, the Black Lives Matter movement having a real impact. It really seemed to raise people's awareness of exclusion and the sense of exclusion that was existing in workplaces before. So I don't know whether it's kind of because we'd already made such a big change that actually we could foresee further changes which would make everybody feel like they belonged in the organisation, not just some of us. So that has been really interesting as well, and I've seen a sort of pick up on conversations about diversity and inclusion and equality in business.
Okay, that's great. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, we hope it continues and actually plays out, but certainly looking on social media and in my network, that's been an increased conversation.
Yes, I think it's certainly on the agenda of many businesses and HR as well.
Yeah, definitely. And trust obviously has been we come back to trust, and I mentioned that earlier. It does definitely feel that there is greater trust, and we had a sense of that, didn't we, you and I, that there was a sense of greater trust. So I ran a little poll on Twitter. We didn't get a huge response though, so what we were going to do was run something now. We're going to use Mentimeter. So this is where the tech comes in. I'm just going to share my screen so that you can get onto Mentimeter through. I'll just share the slide. Bear with me a sec. I will share the slide. Oh, there we go. So hopefully you'll see that. So the question we'd like to ask you is, do you feel trust between employer and employee has increased, decreased, or stayed the same since lockdown started? Now you can answer the question by going to menti.com and entering this code down here. So, and because we're so whizzy, Polly has got the, she'll see the results coming up on her screen, and then she'll share that with us. So if you'd like to go on to menti.com on your smartphone or whatever and enter that code, you should be able to answer that question. There's a multiple choice question for you there. So
Jane, I think you need to stop sharing so that I can share my screen.
Okay, are we getting some results through then? That sounds like it's a good result. We're seeing some
four so far.
Okay, great. So if you just want, I'm just going to take this screen down. So if you haven't already made a note of that number and you want to do so, it's 5612891. And Polly's going to share the results with us.
So we've had 4 people so far. So if you still want to have your say, it's going off a bit. Yeah, so it's menti.com and there's the code there, 5612891. Do you feel trust between employer and employee has increased, decreased or stayed the same since lockdown started? So we've got 5 at the moment. We've got 3 for increased and 2 for decreased. That's interesting.
Yeah, so a mixed view, obviously, from the people that are responding. And I did run the poll on Twitter as well. We had 5 responses to that as well, oddly. I don't think it's the same 5 people because I got different answers. So perhaps this is reflective of the Twitter sphere in which I find myself. But all of the respondents that came back on my poll said that they'd seen an increase in the level of trust. So that's really interesting, isn't it? And I remember one of our early conversations about this event, about speaking at this event, Polly, and I was having a bit of a rant, wasn't I, about and it was about 2 things. There'd been an article in the BBC on the BBC news site about companies using software to monitor employees, and this software has, I mean, even the name of them is just so horrendous. They're things like Staff Cop and Sneak, just, you know, and the ones that are trying to be a bit more subtle are things like Time Doctor and Active Track, but yeah, you know, there had then been, and I think what had disappointed me more was there had been a survey on the CIPD website. So this is of Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development of HR professionals, and they'd had a response of 600 and odd people, and I can't remember the exact figures, but I think it was about 66% of them had said that had responded to a question about whether it was okay to monitor employee productivity while they were at home. 66% of these HR professionals had said yes, it was, and I'd seen this right on the back, and I think it was triggered as a result of the BBC article. So for me, I read it as 66% of HR people wanted, that certainly the respondents wanted us to employers to monitor employees. So by that, you know, it's like monitoring keystrokes and you know, having your camera on all the time and all of those kind of things that we know act really against a trusting relationship between employer and employee, and will do nothing to enhance productivity or trust or engagement in an organisation. So I'm really interested on your take on that, Polly, because I know you weren't quite as ranty.
Well, I didn't see exactly what you saw, and clearly one was triggered by something previously, but I just felt that it depends how you phrase the question, and there was potential there for the question to be slightly ambiguous. And yes, I actually think it's fine to monitor your staff's performance while they're working at home. That's I think that's acceptable, but it probably wasn't meant in quite that quite that way. So no, I agree. It's not acceptable to monitor in terms of, using spyware software. It's totally not how you sort of develop a trusting relationship between, between between employer and employee. And there's a lot to be said for trust. I think people work best when they're in an environment when they are trusted. And the last 7 months or whatever has been a huge exercise in trust. Again, the business I was talking to the other day who moved overnight to working remotely when HR had been wanting that to happen for 6 years, did have certain people who were reluctant and resistant, and but it forced the issue a bit, and those managers who perhaps like to really oversee what people are doing, and the thought that if people are sitting at their desk from 9 to 5, then they must be being super productive. I think we've got to move away from the whole presenteeism thing, where if you're there you must be working, and actually start measuring on output rather than time spent at work. So I think this has been a huge exercise in that, and I think it's an opportunity that businesses could grasp and make the most of, because we have been thrust into this situation, and there's obviously no way we would all want to go through the same again. But I think looking at the positives, this is a particular positive that I feel quite strongly about. And how can we demonstrate that we trust our people? And again, linking it back to mental health, yes, we are. A lot of us are working from home remotely, and to create a sort of environment remotely where people feel safe again and able to work at their sort of pace, and instead of you must be sitting at your desk with your camera on or whatever from these hours, how about thinking, for your mental health, yes, we know you're doing this, that and the other, I can see the work that you're doing because of the output that you're creating. So make sure that you have your lunch break, make sure that you're still staying connected with colleagues, make sure that you're looking after yourself physically. And I think that's just really important. So I think it's all linked. But I do agree, but I was just thinking that question could have been taken ambiguously.
I agree. And I've been frustrated, for a long time in organisations that actually people have not really attended to performance measurement. As you say, that focus on output is obviously the right thing to do. We shouldn't be focusing on time anymore. But there's always been a tendency to, I think, to look at the wrong things to measure. And so people have been looking at things that you can put a number on, and they've been looking at presenteeism and whether somebody turns up on time and whether they go home late, because that's your ideal employee, isn't it? But these days we need something different from people, don't we? Where most people are not working on some kind of assembly line, and not all of our work is done sat in front of a computer. I know a lot of people have missed their commute time, because it was actually probably the only time in the day that they got to think about work often. It was kind of their planning time or their reflecting time. We really need to be building time to do these things into the working day, don't we? So it just seems very short-sighted for employers to be thinking, a productive employee is one who's sitting in front of a computer and tapping lots of keystrokes. It's a long time since people did data entry, but I remember that from kind of early on in my career, and you could see that would be a good measure. How many forms did you fill in, how many keystrokes did you make in a day? But no longer is that, even for software developers who do a lot of tapping, it's about the quality of the work that they're doing, the quality of the code that they're producing, not the amount of code that they're producing. That's really important, isn't it? So I think we really need to have a rethink, but I think we do need to measure it and support people to achieve, and support people to stretch themselves and take on different goals and get more creative about how they do things, and all sorts of things that we can do, which don't involve measuring the amount of time somebody sat in front of a computer.
Yeah, and that does assume that managers do need to set clear objectives and be clear on what they're expecting of their employees. So I think it goes back a level again. If that isn't in place, then that could be very confusing for people, and of course it's harder to measure as well. So I think it's really important for managers to set really clear objectives, and that are agreed obviously with their people. And right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So interestingly, 5 actually came out with they think trust between employer and employee has increased, and 2 decreased. So,
and I'm going to add my 10 from my 5 from Twitter on there. So I'm going to say 10 to 2.
Okay. Okay. So the next question was about how are these changes manifesting in practical terms? So the themes that we talked about in the previous question. So do you want to take that one, Jane?
Yeah, sure. So I was looking at some stats the other day about meetings. There was some research done, I think, back at the beginning, the first few months anyway, and I think it was American research, but it did research of 3 million workers, and the number of meetings that people were having went up by 12.9%. So the number of meetings that people were having, even though they weren't in the office anymore, went up by 12.9%, and the number of attendees at those meetings went up by 13.5%.
Oh, right.
Which I thought was a really interesting fact. Now, it'd be really interesting, I suppose, now that we're that bit further down the line, whether that's adjusting, because it felt to me, and certainly initially, that people had just kind of transferred all of their working practices and just gone online with them. I know from when I was last working in-house, which is 5-6 years ago, my day could often be just back-to-back meetings with no time really to actually do anything. You just felt like you were talking about it all the time. So I would like to think, and I do sense that some companies are doing it, and certainly some of the clients that I'm working with are doing it, that they are reflecting back, as you'd said earlier, on what's worked well and what's not worked well, and they're now adjusting the way that they are working in order to work better and work smarter, not just work harder. So it feels like there are people now going, well, we can't keep this up indefinitely. These, all the meetings we used to do before plus 12.9% with all of these extra participants. What I'd like to see, obviously, I put a post on LinkedIn about it not that long ago, about would be to make all meetings optional. That's my dream, and I've implemented it in another company, a company that I used to work in, whereas we just made all meetings optional. So I'd love that to be a trend that was manifesting itself by this time next year. So I'll keep trying to drop it into conversations like this one. Sorry, say that again.
What was the result? Did you have any feedback, or did people still go to the meetings?
Yeah, they did. We gave people responsibility for how they spent their time. So, if you think about it, if meetings aren't optional and you're only going because they're mandatory, and actually, how are you showing up in those meetings? What are you learning from them? How are you contributing to them? So what we insisted, it was from the ROWE model, actually, the results only working environment model. And so they were advocating being very clear, and it's dependent really on for it to work, on the organizer of a meeting being really clear on what the outcomes of that meeting are and why they're inviting you as a participant, and what they're expecting to achieve. And then you make a decision about whether you actually want to attend that meeting, whether it will be a useful use of your time to actually go and be part of that meeting. So after a few stalled goes, I remember I was HR director at the time. I called a meeting and there were loads of people came, and I thought, there's no way all these people have made a conscious decision to be here. And I'd given them lots of information before, but people hadn't read it. And so I started the meeting by saying, okay, who knows what this meeting's about? And kind of a few people shrugged, and I said, well, why are you here? If you only come because I've called the meeting, or the chief exec's called the meeting, or whatever, you could be wasting your time. You could do something else that's much more valuable. And I think when you give people that sense of ownership over their time and how they're spending it, this isn't company time that they're going to get paid for anyway, so they don't really care how they spend it. Once you give them ownership over it, I think it feels quite different. So, and that for me adjusts the relationship between employer and employee, makes it more of a partnership.
Yes. We've actually had a question. Did the decision makers still go to the meetings? So just as we're on meetings, did the decision makers still go? That's a really interesting question.
Well, it's often the decision makers that are calling the meeting, isn't it, really? So yeah, they were there. People did still go to meetings. They made the positive choice to be there. They were interested in the topic. They wanted to hear what's going to be said. They wanted to be part of the decision. They wanted to have an input. They wanted to hear what somebody had to talk about. So all of that was all positive reasons for being in the room or on the screen. Not just, oh God, I've got a 3 o'clock. I'm just, I'll grab a coffee on the way and just shuffle in and sit down. And what are we here for? What's this about? It feels like such a waste of time. And it's coming back to that, waste of human potential again. So anything that I can do to buck the trend on that.
I think I found at the beginning of lockdown or when we all started, using Zoom, everything became a meeting, and so just to have a quick, regular sort of one-to-one catch-up with a team member had to be a Zoom meeting. So everything sort of became a meeting, and the sort of casual, walking past someone's desk, quick conversation couldn't really occur. So you had to have a Zoom catch-up meeting to talk about that. And I do think people are really suffering Zoom fatigue because it's too much, and it's exhausting it's tiring being on a screen, I think, because you don't get the non-verbal cues or feedback from people, and words and the visuals are just one part of communication, aren't they? So if you can't see kind of how people are reacting to things, it's hard to kind of tailor your communication. So I think that's a real thing. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and there's this. They talked about dissonance, didn't they, as well? That between seeing people in real life and seeing them on a screen, and how you could see them but you couldn't sense them and feel them in all the other ways that we do as human beings, and which we kind of say is not allowed in HR, don't we? So you're not allowed to see and feel. You're not allowed to feel your colleagues in that way. But we've got more senses than our eyes, haven't we, when we're looking at people? So, and I think that people took a little while to get used to that. I come back to that purpose question as well about the meetings, and somebody's asked in the Q&A about reducing the number of meetings. Creating a clear sense of purpose in the organisation can often help people to work out what is that they should be focusing on, and what actually is not contributing towards that purpose, what is a waste of time. So the great organisations that I'm working with are setting really clear purpose statements and embedding those so that people can make decisions every day based on how to achieve that purpose and through their own behaviour and activities.
Yeah. And I think leading by example is a really key thing here as well, in terms of keeping people motivated and engaged while working remotely. Talking about what you're doing for your own well-being and looking after yourself, and making sure that you do get out at lunchtime, perhaps, particularly as we've got winter coming and our days are getting shorter. I can easily see people going from screen to sofa, in the evening, and forgetting about sort of their own well-being, really. And I think as we do go into winter, I think that's really, really key. I was on a panel discussion last week, actually, and James Reed, who's the chairman of Reed Global, said at the beginning of lockdown, he predicted a tsunami of job losses in the autumn, which hasn't transpired to the degree that he was expecting or had anticipated. But I predict a sort of tsunami of mental health issues, or even physical health, because we were at home. We're not always set up particularly for work, are we? And whilst there is the legal obligation that employers have to actually look after their health and safety even when they're at home, I think people have been working on their beds. They've been working sort of out of broom cupboards and goodness knows what. So in terms of your physical well-being, but also your mental well-being, it's really, really key that people are encouraged to look after themselves, and I think leading by example is hugely important. So if you're getting up and leaving your desk in the middle of the day and going for a walk, a 10-minute walk, again, as you were saying, people have missed that commute time. I go running sometimes, and it's actually when I go running that I have my most creative ideas. So if I sit down to brainstorm something, I'm probably not going to have those ideas. Then when my brain switches to something completely different, and get outside and sort of, look at the trees, the beautiful colours changing on the trees, and telling people that that's what you're doing, so that if you as a leader do these things, then other people are going to feel that they're able to do that as well. I think that's really key, that you lead by example.
Yeah, it would be nice if we continued that that kind of personalisation, wouldn't it, of our employment experience, I suppose. That ability. I spoke to lots of people who recognise the benefit of just sitting down and having their family lunch, or having lunch with their partner or whatever. If you're both working from home at lunchtime, so nice, and something that you don't normally get to do. Get away from your screen, have a chat, go for a walk. Not a run, but well done you, Polly. And sit and just kind of talk about how the day's going so far. And there's just something nice about it. I personally find myself much more energized in the afternoon than I used to, when I'd be working quite differently. So I think there are positives. I think we've just got to make sure that we're looking after ourselves. Yes,
definitely.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion, didn't we? And I'm conscious of time, so but we could perhaps touch on this question. I know you've got quite a bit to say. So what would you advise any business now looking to increase the diversity of their workforce? If they're hiring, or they're just looking to change things up in terms of who's working where?
Sure. There are huge benefits to having a diverse workforce, as well as it being the right thing to do. There are actually huge business benefits as well. So in terms of hiring, or surrounding yourselves with people who are different to you, brings a whole other angle to the creativity and what's going on in your organisation. So hugely beneficial. It does need to be driven from the top, I think. It's helpful if this is really embedded into the core values of the company. You're just paying lip service to it, perhaps. But I think if you're just starting, I think there are a few things that you could do, including educating yourself and the people around you about equality and diversity and, you know, inclusivity, and not discriminating, and challenging, gently challenging. I think you need to be sensitive, because I think some people have had biases that have been instilled in us since, you know, we all have, we've biases that have been instilled in us since childhood, really. So gently challenging and calling out inappropriate behaviour, so that people are aware of what's being said and what's going on. I think we all do it sometimes, completely unconsciously and unintentionally, but it's kind of reinforcing those values. So I think education, there's a huge amount to do, just gently starting to learn a bit more yourself, and then gently educating those around you. One thing that I heard about is to decode sort of gender, perhaps inappropriate use of words that will perhaps put off certain gender, is Text.io, and then io.com will actually decode job adverts in terms of gender, sort of misuse of words. So I think that's a bit of a tip to
I've recommended that to a few people as well, and similar. They're really good, aren't they? You can just cut and paste, or copy and paste text into there, and it'll just kind of give it a once over. It's really useful. I like, because as you know, I like to look at things on a system-wide basis, so and think of workplaces as a kind of context for people to operate within. So the idea of actively creating a culture of belonging in an organisation, I think is where I'd recommend people look to change things. So, you know, and I think regardless of where we come from, or, you know, our heritage or our background or what have you, then or any of the protected characteristics, we can all appreciate at some time having been excluded, and we understand how painful that exclusion can be. So, you know, I know there's lots of lived experience that we can't recognise, and we can listen to other people and understand and try and hear what other people are saying, but creating an atmosphere where there's a sense of inclusion and belonging, where people can talk about their experiences, where everybody is welcome regardless, and bringing everybody in to create that sense of belonging, I think is something that's it can open up some really nice discussions, some difficult discussions as well, but some nice discussions which enable people to connect more closely with others who aren't like them, rather than just kind of pushing them away.
Definitely, completely agree. We're almost at the end of the questions. We've got one last one. I'm a bit conscious of time. We've got one more survey we wanted to do, and then there's potentially questions as well from attendees.
Should we run the next poll then? I think that'd be really interesting, because we just wanted to get a take from the audience, didn't we, on how they were feeling right now. And the question is about, you just remind me of the question, Polly.
How are you feeling about the future of work? So just one word. How are you feeling about the future of work?
And we're going to create a word cloud together through all of your input to that. So we're back on menti.com.
So if you go back onto Menti, and it's the same code, so it's 5612891, or you may not have to enter it again. And then just one word that should come up then, that question, and then just one word to describe how you're feeling about the future of work. Give it a couple of minutes.
So if the slide's not changed when you go into it, it should mine's come up with a little kind of prompt to say, did you want to change the slide so that I could enter my words on there. So really interested to hear how everybody's feeling about the future of work right now. You've got some responses coming through, Polly. How's it looking?
Yep, we've had 3. Yeah, and you can actually, I think there's an option to put in. Oh yeah, we've got a few now.
Great.
Right.
Do you want to share your screen and we'll have a look at that? And then just remind anybody that's got any questions, if you'd like to pop them into the Q&A, we'd be happy to answer them in the last few minutes that we have. We are finishing at 1 o'clock.
Can you see that?
Yes.
So we've had a few words. We've got evolved, we've got opportunistic, hopeful, forward-thinking, ambitious, excited, overwhelmed, unsure, challenged, positive. That's really interesting.
It's a real mix, isn't it?
Great, thank you.
It's a real mix. So thank you very much for inputting to that. And I'm sure, you know, we're a relatively small number of people on here, but you know, I think we're probably representative of workforces or the workforce across the world at the moment. You know, not quite sure what's happening next. Not sure of the opportunities that might be arising for change, or you know, for ourselves or for organisations, but hopeful is a good one.
Really interesting.
So
we have had a question. Any tips for working smarter, less meetings in a collaborative working environment? We've got just a couple of minutes before we finish.
Yeah, sure. So from my perspective, in addition to what we've already discussed, I think all of the things that we've talked about would help. So that idea of being quite focused on purpose, to have clear goals that you find inspiring as an individual and that can kind of guide you as to what you're doing every day, and having more choice as an employer, or as an employee, or being given more choice about how you spend your time. I think we need to be collaborative, but we also need to have focused time and task specific time, don't we? So kind of splitting up the day is great. I think a lot of the time where we meet to share information, when actually we could share that in other ways potentially. For example, how much of us coming together is actually about collaboration?
Yeah, I think I agree. I guess looking at technology and how else we can use it, I suppose, and how else we can share information. Do we have to have a meeting, or could we just have a a group chat on Teams or Slack, or just to keep each other updated in a more informal way? And being really clear on what's expected and the goals and targets of the team and you as individuals. And then I think celebrating success as well. So, when those goals and targets are met, make sure that you celebrate. But it is a balance, because I think staying connected is also, sorry, I've just dropped my pen. Staying connected is really important in this right now. So it is a balance between making sure that you're not having too many meetings for the sake of it, and also but also enabling people to stay connected in various different ways.
That sounds like great advice, Polly, and just like to say, as we bring this to a close, thank you to all of you that have attended and have hung on. I keep seeing the attendee numbers kind of going up and down, so thank you so much to all of you, particularly those who've been here throughout. We've really enjoyed your company, even though we couldn't see you. We felt your presence, and if you do have any questions for either of us, we do just have a final slide which has got contact details. What's that one? There you go. So if you just want to take a photo or whatever you want of those, then please just, you want to follow up on conversations that we've had. We'd be really happy to talk about this stuff. I know I could talk about it for hours, never mind an hour. And I know Polly's very passionate about this and helping organisations to achieve as well. So please do get in touch. Polly, anything you'd like to say?
No, just thank you so much for attending, and thank you. I really appreciate it, and it was a real joy to do, Jane. So thank you.
And enjoy the rest of the festival, everybody.
All
right. Thank you. Bye.